Imagine waking up tomorrow, with an absolute unshakable certainty about what you're meant to do today.
Right. Just total clarity.
Yeah, exactly. No anxiety, no sense of dread, just this quiet, joyful drive to actually get out of bed.
Which is, I mean, so rare for most of us.
It really is.
Yeah.
We spend so much of our lives just kind of running on this endless treadmill of obligations, waking up already feeling like we're behind schedule.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
to wake up with that kind of clear purpose almost sounds like a superpower or maybe a luxury that's just reserved for a lucky few.
Right. But what's fascinating is that in Okinawa, Japan, they don't just imagine this feeling. They actually have a specific word for it.
Yeah, and scientists are finding that this single concept might just be the underlying reason why people in this region are living, well past 100 years old.
Thriving, really. Not just living, but thriving with a fraction of the diseases that we see plaguing the modern Western world.
Exactly. So today we're taking a deep dive into the book Ikigai, The Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life by Hector Garcia and Frances Miralles.
It's such an incredible book.
It is. And the sources we're pulling from today include actual field notes from remote Japanese villages, interviews with supercentenarians, and deep physiological data from the world's blue zones.
Which really challenges the entire way we construct our lives.
How so?
Well, we've basically built this global culture that's just obsessed with frantic productivity.
Oh, right. The whole hustle culture thing.
Exactly. We're always trying to hack every second of the day just to squeeze out a tiny bit more output. But this deep dive is an invitation to do the exact opposite.
To slow down.
Yes. The research shows that the pursuit of longevity and deep satisfaction isn't found in, some biohacking laboratory or a new productivity app.
It's found in this practical philosophy called Ikigai, which the authors roughly translate as well, the happiness of always being busy with something that has meaning.
Right. But before we get into the biology of it all, we should really break down the linguistics of that word.
Yeah, let's do that, because the characters themselves actually reveal a lot about the whole mindset.
They do. So in Japanese, ikigai is written by combining iki, which means life, and gai, which means to be worthwhile.
The worthwhile life.
Exactly. But the text notes that the characters for gai can actually be broken down even further.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they can mean things like armor or number one or, and I love this one, to be the first to head into battle.
Wow.
And that's combined with the character for beautiful or elegant.
So it's not just this passive thing. There's a real proactive energy in that translation.
Absolutely. It implies that your purpose isn't just something that, passively happens to you while you sit on a meditation cushion.
Right. It's an action.
It's a beautiful, elegant charge into the world. The fundamental premise here is that everyone has an ikigai.
Like a raison d'etre hidden deep inside.
Exactly. Just waiting to be discovered through patient searching. It's the specific reason you put your feet on the floor in the morning.
And what I found so interesting in the sources is that this philosophy completely rejects the Western concept of retirement.
Oh, totally. There literally isn't even a word in Japanese that means retiring for good in the way that we use it in English.
Right. The concept just doesn't exist in that culture.
But I have to push back on that for a second. Because if people never stop working, doesn't that inevitably lead to burnout?
I mean, that's the natural question, right?
Yeah. An eternal work life sounds less like a secret to happiness and more like, a dystopian nightmare.
Well, that reaction makes total sense given how we define work in the West.
How do you mean?
We view work mostly as a transaction. We sacrifice our time and our energy performing tasks we often really dislike.
Right. Just to get a paycheck.
Exactly.
Right.
We're exchanging misery for currency with the ultimate goal of hoarding enough of that currency so we can eventually just stop working forever.
Yeah. That is definitely a recipe for burnout.
But the Okinawan concept of lifelong work is fundamentally different. It's not about grinding at a miserable corporate job until you drop dead.
Okay, so what is it about? It's about staying active and doing what you actually love. It's a lifelong pursuit of purpose.
Right. So if your Ikigai involves, cultivating a massive garden or practicing an art form or organizing your local community,
Then the idea of retiring from that makes absolutely no sense. Why would you permanently walk away from the exact thing that gives your life meaning?
so the burnout comes from the friction of doing something you hate, not the physical act of just doing something continuously.
Precisely. In fact, the sudden stop of retirement, that abrupt severing of a person's main source of daily meaning, is heavily correlated in the medical literature with accelerated cognitive and physical decline.
Wow. So stopping is actually the dangerous part.
Yeah. And in Okinawa, specifically, this rural town called Agimi, which has earned the nickname the Village of Longevity, we see the biological results of never severing that connection.
Ogimi is the one with the crazy statistics, right?
Yes. It boasts 24.55 centenarians for every 100,000 inhabitants.
That's just wild. And the medical data shows they aren't just barely surviving at that age, they're highly functional.
Extremely functional.
The sources show that populations in these blue zones suffer from significantly fewer chronic illnesses, like cancer and heart disease.
Right, and the women experience much milder symptoms during menopause.
Yeah, and both men and women maintain higher levels of sexual hormones much later in life. Plus, the rate of dementia is just a fraction of the global average.
It's incredible.
But I want to connect the philosophy to the biology here.
Yeah.
How does a psychological concept like just having a purpose literally prevent a cell from mutating into cancer or an artery from hardening?
So, to bridge that gap between having a reason to live and actually biologically living longer, we have to look at the mechanisms of biological aging.
Okay.
The sources use this striking analogy to visualize it. They call it aging's escape velocity.
Oh, the rabbit analogy. I love this.
Right. So imagine a sign far off in the future, and on that sign is the exact year of your death.
Okay. A little morbid, but I'm with you.
Now imagine a rabbit holding that sign, and it's walking away from you into the future.
Got it.
Every year you live, you take a step toward that rabbit. If the rabbit just stands still, you will eventually catch it. You'll hit that year.
Right.
But the speed at which the rabbit walks forward represents the effectiveness of your lifestyle, your environment, and medical technology.
So if your daily habits allow that rabbit to walk at a pace of 1 year for every year of your life, you never catch it.
Exactly. You achieve biological immortality.
I mean, obviously, absolute biological immortality is still theoretical, but the mechanisms pushing that rabbit forward are heavily documented in the text.
They are, and the primary engine driving that rabbit is the deliberate management of mental and physical stagnation.
Which brings us to the neuroscientist Shlomo Bresnitz. His research is cited pretty heavily here.
Yes. He demonstrates that the human brain is inherently designed to conserve energy. It's basically lazy.
Just trying to save calories.
Exactly. Once you learn how to perform a task, whether that's driving a car or analyzing a spreadsheet, the brain encodes that process into an automatic routine.
It shifts the workload.
Right. It moves it away from the energy-hungry prefrontal cortex and pushes it down into the deeper, older, more automatic parts of the brain.
The brain puts itself on autopilot.
Hmm?
But the problem is, if we spend our entire adult lives on autopilot, the neural pathways we aren't actively using begin to wither.
Yes, through a process called synaptic pruning.
So the brain is really like a muscle. If you only ever lift the exact same 5-pound weight every single day, it shrinks. Stepping out of your comfort zone is basically a mental gym session.
That's a perfect way to put it. The only way to force the brain to maintain its plasticity, to physically grow new synaptic connections, is to confront it with novel, unfamiliar information.
You have to break the routines.
Exactly. Learning a new language, mastering an instrument, or solving complex problems related to your Ikigai forces the brain out of its energy-saving mode.
And that triggers something biological, right?
It triggers the release of neurotrophic factors. Think of them as basically fertilizer for your brain cells.
Oh.
Yeah, they protect the cells from the degradation that's normally associated with aging and dementia.
But wait, breaking routines and confronting the unfamiliar introduces stress.
Yeah.
And we are universally taught that stress is the ultimate killer.
Right, that it spikes cortisol and ruins everything.
Yeah. The text even highlights a study from the Heidelberg University Hospital where they subjected a young doctor to a grueling mock job interview, followed by complex math problems under immense pressure.
The Heidelberg study is so crucial for understanding the cellular damage of chronic stress.
What exactly did they find in his blood?
Well, when they analyzed his blood afterward, they found that his immune system had reacted to the psychological stress of the math problems the exact same way it would react to an actual physical infection.
Like a virus.
Exactly. His antibodies mobilized to fight. But because there was no actual physical pathogen to fight, that inflammatory response just began attacking his own healthy cells.
That's terrifying. And there was another study from the University of California that showed this kind of severe, sustained stress literally degrades our telomeres.
Telomeres being those protective caps at the ends of our DNA strands.
Like the little plastic aglets at the end of a shoelace?
Exactly. Every time a cell divides, those caps get a little bit shorter, and when they're finally gone, the cell can't divide anymore, and it dies.
So chronic stress is essentially burning the fuse of our cellular lifespan at both ends.
Yes. However, and this is a massive however, the nuance provided by Dr. Howard S. Friedman fundamentally changes how we should look at this.
Right, because his research found something totally opposite.
He conducted a longitudinal study over 20 years and discovered that a complete absence of stress is also highly detrimental to your longevity.
Wait, really?
Yes. People who chose a completely relaxed lifestyle, who avoided all challenges and retired early just to do nothing, they actually died younger than those who maintained a moderate, manageable level of stress.
That seems entirely counterintuitive.
Yeah.
I mean, if stress shortens telomeres, how can stress also keep you alive longer?
It comes down to the concept of hormesis.
Hormesis, okay, what's that?
It's the biological phenomenon where a low dose of a stressor triggers a beneficial adaptation in the body, but a high dose causes toxicity.
Oh, so it's exactly like lifting weights.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're creating micro tears in the muscle, which is technically a stressor, to force the muscle to rebuild stronger.
So a low level of psychological stress, like the kind of eustress you feel when you're trying to solve a complex problem you care deeply about, that's actually good for you.
Exactly. When you're stretching your abilities to fulfill your Ikigai, it promotes healthy cardiovascular function and cognitive sharpness.
It's the frantic, modern, chronic stress that's the problem.
Right. The kind where our amygdala reacts to a delayed email the exact same way it would react to a stalking predator. That's what causes the toxic inflammatory cascade.
So we really have to differentiate between the anxiety of feeling hunted by modern life and the productive tension of trying to build something meaningful.
Yes, the distinction is everything.
And alongside managing that tension, the research points to two major physical antidotes to premature aging: minimizing sedentary behavior and protecting our melatonin production.
Because sitting is truly the enemy. The danger of sitting isn't just about burning fewer calories.
What else does it do?
Sedentary behavior actively distorts telomere length and reduces the body's ability to clear out metabolic waste.
Yikes. And what about melatonin? We typically just think of it as the gummy we take to get sleepy.
Right, but it is actually one of the most powerful natural antioxidants produced by the human body. The text even calls it the model's best-kept secret for youthful skin.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, the pineal gland secretes it during the dark hours of our circadian rhythm. And as it circulates through the body, it scavenges the free radicals that cause cellular rusting.
So it's basically doing maintenance while we sleep.
Exactly. It strengthens the immune system and actively slows the accumulation of amyloid plaques, which are associated with Alzheimer's.
But our body's natural production of melatonin drops significantly after age 30, right?
It does. And then we artificially suppress it even further with blue light from our screens and chronic evening cortisol spikes.
So maintaining youthful cellular function requires us to fiercely protect our sleep architecture.
Absolutely. So if we accept that a life completely devoid of challenge causes biological decay, and a life of chronic panic causes biological burnout.
Then the central task of human existence becomes systematically finding the right challenge.
Yes, we have to find a purpose that provides that perfect, life-extending dose of productive tension.
Which brings us to how we actually go about healing the mind so we're capable of finding that purpose in the first place.
Right, because you can't find your Ikigai if you're paralyzed by trauma or anxiety.
Exactly. And the text draws this brilliant comparison between Western and Eastern psychological frameworks. In the West, the pioneer of healing through purpose was Viktor Frankl.
The founder of logotherapy.
Yes. And he would introduce this concept to his patients in the most jarring way possible. He would look at them and ask straight out, "Why do you not commit suicide?"
It's such a profoundly confronting question. I mean, most therapists today would never dare ask it.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
But Frankl used it as a diagnostic tool.
Right. The patient would usually stammer, caught off guard, and then eventually offer a reason.
They might say, "Well, I couldn't leave my children," or "I have a piece of art I still need to finish," or even just a cherished memory they wanted to hold on to.
And whatever that answer was, Frankl would isolate it. That tiny little seed of meaning became the entire foundation of their therapy.
It's such a stark contrast to traditional Freudian psychoanalysis.
Completely different. In psychoanalysis, the framework assumes the patient is suffering from unresolved trauma or, repressed neuroses.
Right, you lie on a couch, looking backward into your past to dig up the root of your anxiety.
But logotherapy asks the patient to sit up straight and look forward.
Psychoanalysis looks backward. Logotherapy looks forward. Psychoanalysis is driven by the search for pleasure and resolving past conflict, but logotherapy is driven by the search for meaning.
Exactly. Frankl argued that many of the psychological issues people face, like those deep feelings of emptiness or generalized anxiety or existential dread, they aren't clinical mental illnesses.
What are they then?
They're a natural spiritual anguish that occurs when a human life lacks a defined purpose. He called this the existential vacuum.
And his authority on this isn't just purely theoretical. I mean, he developed these ideas while surviving the Holocaust.
Yes, he was a prisoner in Auschwitz, stripped of his identity, his family, his dignity.
The conditions were quite literally designed to break the human spirit completely.
But Frankl realized something crucial. The prisoners who survived the longest weren't necessarily the physically strongest.
Right. They were the ones who held on to a vision of the future.
For Frankl himself, it was the burning need to rewrite his manuscript on logotherapy.
Because the guards had confiscated and destroyed his original life's work.
Exactly. So he would find tiny scraps of paper in the camp and painstakingly reconstruct his manuscript from memory.
That singular purpose gave his biology the resilience to withstand unimaginable suffering.
He really embodied that quote from Nietzsche, "He who has a why to live for can bear with almost anyhow."
Logotherapy teaches us that meaning doesn't come from a life of ease. It comes from taking responsibility for a task or a cause greater than ourselves.
Absolutely.
Now, if logotherapy represents the Western approach, identifying the why, the Japanese approach, which was actually developed around the same time, offers a radically different perspective on the how.
Yes, Morita therapy.
Created by Shoma Morita. And I find this approach fascinating because it completely subverts modern self-care advice.
It really does. Today, if you open any social media app, you're just bombarded with advice to analyze your feelings, journal your anxiety, try to control your emotional state.
Yeah, regulate your nervous system, right?
Right. But Morita says you should actively stop trying to control your emotions.
Which sounds crazy at first.
Well, Morita was heavily influenced by Zen Buddhism, and Zen views emotions as natural phenomena entirely outside of our conscious control.
Like the weather.
Exactly. He taught that trying to suppress or alter a feeling like anxiety is a fool's errand. It's like standing in a thunderstorm and trying to order the rain to stop.
It's just not going to work. The text unpacks this, using the fable of a donkey tied to a post.
I love this fable. It perfectly illustrates the psychological trap we fall into.
Break it down for us.
So the donkey represents our mind, and the post represents a fear or an anxiety. The donkey is terrified of the post and wants to escape, so it starts running in circles, trying to pull away.
But because it's tied to the post.
Exactly. The harder it runs, the more the rope wraps around the post, pulling the donkey tighter and tighter against the very thing it's trying to avoid.
Wow. So by obsessing over our anxiety and constantly trying to fix it, we're really just tangling ourselves up in it more.
Right. The meta-anxiety, being anxious about the fact that we are anxious, is what actually paralyzes us. We have to accept our emotions.
But wait, I have a question about this. If someone is experiencing debilitating sadness or panic, and they just accept it, aren't they in danger of just wallowing in that despair forever?
That's a very common critique.
Where is the mechanism for actual improvement if we just abandon emotional control?
The mechanism lies in severing the link between emotion and action.
Okay, what does that mean?
Modern psychology often implies that we need to feel motivated in order to act, or we need to feel calm before we can do our work.
Right, I need to get in the right headspace.
Exactly. Morita therapy rejects this entirely. You accept the emotion, but you do not allow it to dictate your behavior. The core principle is behavioral activation. Your feelings will change as a result of your actions, not the other way around.
So when a patient in Morita therapy feels overwhelmed, the therapist doesn't ask, how do you feel about that?
No. They ask Morita's central question, what do we need to be doing right now?
You focus on the present action. You fulfill your immediate responsibilities regardless of the internal storm.
Right. And to rewire the brain to actually operate this way, Morita designed a grueling 4-phase therapeutic process.
It sounds super intense. It uses extreme sensory deprivation to reset the patient's dopamine and stress receptors.
It is intense. Phase 1 requires complete isolation and rest for 5 to 7 days.
Just lying there.
Yes. The patient is placed in a room without a television, no books, no phones. They aren't even allowed to speak to their family.
Think about what that does to a modern brain.
Oh, it's brutal. We use constant stimulation, scrolling, watching, talking to distract ourselves from our own internal monologue.
So when you remove all those external inputs, the brain's default mode network must just kick into overdrive.
Exactly. The patient is forced to face the absolute unfiltered reality of their own anxiety, their grief, their boredom. It's intensely uncomfortable.
Does the therapist help them through it?
Not really. The therapist visits daily but offers almost no interaction. They just advise the patient to observe the rise and fall of their emotions without judgment.
So what happens next? Eventually, the human brain just cannot tolerate absolute boredom.
Right. The desire for action finally overrides the paralysis of the anxiety. When the patient reaches the point where they are desperate to simply do something, anything, they graduate to phase 2.
Which involves silent, repetitive tasks, light occupational therapy.
Yes. The patient remains in silence and isolation, but they begin performing low-stakes tasks. Writing in a diary, pulling weeds, maybe painting.
They're reintroducing action into their lives, but keeping the cognitive load extremely low,
Exactly. And then phase 3 amplifies this by introducing intense physical labor.
like chopping wood in the mountains.
Yes, Morita would take his patients out to chop wood or engage in strenuous ceramics work. They are finally allowed to speak, but only about the physical task at hand.
What's the goal of making it so physical?
Physiological grounding. By exhausting the body, the mind quiets down. The patient learns the physical sensation of immersing themselves in work despite whatever lingering anxieties they might have.
Which leads to the final phase, phase 4, reintegration into society.
Right. The patient returns to the real world, but they operate under a completely new paradigm.
They no longer wait for the right mood to pursue their Ikigai. They know they can observe a negative emotion, acknowledge it, and just proceed with their day's work anyway.
They've fundamentally healed their relationship with their own mind.
That's incredibly powerful. And once that foundation is built, we can look at how they approach their work. Because finding your Ikigai is really only half the equation, right?
Absolutely. The other half is mastering the psychological state required to execute that purpose with joy.
Which brings us to the magic of flow.
Yes. Flow is basically the absolute pinnacle of human experience.
It was pioneered by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, right? He described it as a state of consciousness where the ego just dissolves completely.
Exactly. The boundary between you and the task vanishes, and your perception of time violently distorts.
The text references that great joke attributed to Albert Einstein to explain this time dilation.
Oh, the stove joke.
Yeah. Put your hand on a hot stove for a minute, and it seems like an hour. Sit with a pretty girl for an hour, and it seems like a minute.
It perfectly captures the feeling. When we enter a flow state, the brain undergoes a process called transient hypofrontality.
Transient hypofrontality. That sounds complicated. What is happening physically in the brain?
Basically, the prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for our inner critic, our sense of self, and tracking time temporarily downregulates. It quiets down.
So the inner voice just shuts off.
Exactly. The brain reallocates all of its processing power to the immediate sensory input and the execution of the task. It's a highly efficient, incredibly peaceful state of mind.
But you can't just snap your fingers and enter transient hypofrontality.
No, I wish.
The environment and the task have to meet very strict criteria. And the first rule is the challenge skill balance.
Right. The task must push you right to the very edge of your current abilities.
So if the challenge is too far beyond your skill level, the brain triggers a cortisol response, resulting in anxiety and frustration.
And if the challenge is too far below your skill level, the brain disengages, resulting in boredom.
Flow lives in that narrow, constantly shifting channel in the middle where you're stretching just enough to require total focus.
Exactly. And the second, and perhaps most difficult rule, involves the management of goals.
Having a clear objective.
Yes, you must have a clear objective to initiate the task. But, and this is the crucial part, the moment the task begins, you must entirely forget the objective and surrender to the process.
This is where so many people fail. I was thinking about it like an Olympic gymnast on the balance beam.
That's a great analogy.
She trains for 4 years with the clear objective of winning a gold medal. But if, during her actual routine, she is visualizing the podium,
Or thinking about the endorsement deals, or worrying about the judge's score.
right, if she's doing that, she is not in the present moment. Her prefrontal cortex is active, calculating outcomes.
And because her mind is in the future, her body loses its micro-coordination in the present and she falls off the beam.
Exactly. To achieve perfection, you have to divorce yourself from the outcome. Focus must be absolute.
Which brings us to the greatest cultural antagonist of flow, the epidemic of distraction.
Our smartphones.
Yes, multitasking is a total myth. The human brain cannot simultaneously process two complex cognitive tasks.
But we all think we can. Like drafting an email while listening to a podcast and glancing at text messages.
We aren't multitasking, we are rapid task switching.
And every time we switch, there's a cognitive penalty.
Yes. The brain has to load the rules for the new task and dump the rules for the old one. We experience something called attentional residue.
Attentional residue, meaning a piece of our focus remains stuck on the previous task.
Exactly. And this friction destroys any chance of entering a flow state. It causes massive mental fatigue.
So how do we combat this? The text urges a focus on single tasking.
Yes, we have to engineer distraction-free zones. This includes practices like the Pomodoro technique.
Committing to 25 minutes of unbroken focus followed by a strict 5-minute rest.
Right, and it involves batch processing our communications, checking emails only at designated times rather than reacting to every single ping.
The authors even recommend implementing a tech fasting day once a week, completely abstaining from screens to allow the brain's dopamine receptors to reset to a natural baseline.
Which sounds so hard, but it's so necessary because when you look at Japanese culture, the mastery of this single-minded focus is elevated to an art form.
They revere the takumis, right? The master artisans who dedicate their entire lives to perfecting a single craft.
Yes. The most famous example is Jiro, the chef from the documentary Jiro Dreams of Sushi.
He has been making sushi for over 80 years.
It's incredible. His apprentices spend years just learning how to massage the octopus or cook an egg omelet before they're even allowed to touch the fish.
In a Western mindset, doing the exact same thing for 80 years sounds agonizing.
It sounds like torture to us.
But Jiro never gets bored because he is constantly accessing flow. He's always finding microscopic ways to refine his technique.
And there's a deep philosophical underpinning to this dedication, rooted in Shinto animism.
Right, the idea that objects have a spirit.
Yes. Shinto philosophy posits that all things, trees, rivers, tools, materials, possess a kami, or a spirit.
So when an artisan approaches a block of wood or a piece of fish, they don't view it as dead matter to be exploited.
Exactly. They believe they're entering into a collaboration with the material spirit. Their profound respect for the medium demands their absolute attention.
The work becomes a sacred meditation. We see this with the otakas too, like Hayao Miyazaki, the legendary anime.
Oh, perfect example. Even after officially retiring from Studio Ghibli, he returned to his desk the very next day to draw.
Because drawing is his Ikigai. The joy is in the physical act of pencil on paper, not in the box office returns of the film.
But, it's easy to see how directing an Oscar-winning film or running a 3-Michelin-star restaurant can induce flow.
Yeah, what about the rest of us? What if our daily tasks involve data entry or sweeping floors or running errands?
Well, the beauty of flow is that it isn't dependent on the prestige of the task. It's dependent on the application of attention.
Which brings us to the concept of microflow.
Yes. Microflow is the ability to turn mundane, repetitive chores into highly rewarding experiences by imposing our own rules and seeking perfection in the micro-movements.
Bill Gates actually provides a perfect example of this in the text.
Right, with the dishes.
Yeah. Despite his infinite resources, he washes his own dishes every night. And he approaches it not as a chore to be rushed through, but as a deliberate ritual.
He washes the plates first, then the silverware, optimizing the exact amount of soap and water.
By bringing his full consciousness to the sensation of the warm water and the geometry of the dishes, he forces his brain into a mild flow state. It becomes a decompression mechanism.
Richard Feynman, the Nobel laureate physicist, did the exact same thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When a supercomputing firm hired him, they didn't immediately have a high-level physics problem for him to solve, so they asked him to go buy office supplies.
A Nobel laureate buying pens.
Right. But he applied his genius-level intellect to optimizing the route and the purchases, finding immense satisfaction in executing a trivial task perfectly.
Microflow proves that boredom is a choice.
It really is.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time analyzing the psychological architecture of Ikigai, the meaning, the emotional regulation, the flow states, but the physical vessel carrying this mind must also be maintained.
The biology has to support the psychology.
Exactly. The centenarians of Okinawa support this high-level cognitive function with rigorous daily physical habits. Let's examine the biological inputs that create such robust longevity, beginning with the Ikigai diet.
The nutritional data from these blue zones is just staggering, particularly regarding the sheer diversity of their intake.
Yeah, Okinawan centenarians consume an average of 206 different foods on a regular basis.
206. Meanwhile, in the West, most people rotate through the same heavily processed 10 or 12 meals every week.
Guilty is charged. But why is that diversity so crucial?
It's crucial for gut microbiome health, which we now know dictates everything from our immune response to our serotonin production.
Dex mentions they aim to eat the rainbow.
Yes. By ensuring their plates contain red peppers, orange carrots, green spinach, and purple eggplant, they are ingesting a massive spectrum of phytonutrients.
And these compounds, which give the vegetables their colors, operate as cellular protectants in the human body.
Exactly. But the secret to their longevity isn't just the presence of vegetables, it's the deliberate restriction of calories.
This is the cultural practice of harahachibu, which translates to fill your belly to 80%.
Right. They stop eating just before the feeling of fullness registers.
The biological mechanism behind this is profound. Digestion is one of the most energy-intensive processes the human body undertakes.
It takes a ton of work. When we gorge ourselves to 100% capacity, the body diverts massive amounts of blood and energy to the gastrointestinal tract.
Which is why we feel so lethargic after a huge meal. And it generates an enormous amount of metabolic byproduct, accelerating cellular oxidation.
But by consistently operating at a slight caloric deficit, the Okinawans trigger a biological process called autophagy.
Autophagy. That's essentially the body's internal recycling program, right?
Exactly. When cells aren't overwhelmed with processing new nutrients from a massive meal, they enter a state of mild stress and begin cleaning house.
They hunt down damaged proteins, misfolded enzymes, and those senescent zombie cells that cause inflammation, breaking them down for energy.
Caloric restriction literally forces the body to eat its own garbage, which prevents the buildup of cellular damage that leads to aging and disease.
But practicing caloric restriction in a modern environment designed to promote overconsumption requires strategy.
Oh, definitely. And the Okinawans utilize a very effective psychological trick involving portion presentation.
The multiple tiny plates.
Yes. Instead of serving a meal on one massive plate, they distribute the food across 5 or 6 very small dishes.
It hacks the brain's visual processing. When you look at an array of tiny plates, your brain registers a large volume of food. You feel psychologically satisfied by the variety and the visual abundance, even though the total caloric intake is significantly lower.
It's brilliant, and the foods populating those tiny plates are highly functional superfoods.
Tofu and sweet potatoes are foundational. But the beverages might actually be the most potent part of the diet.
Oh, the tea. They drink copious amounts of sanpincha, which is a specific blend of jasmine tea, and juice from the shikuwasa, a local citrus fruit.
Both of which are overwhelmingly rich in flavonoids.
Yes. Flavonoids are aggressive antioxidants. They patrol the bloodstream, hunting for the free radicals that are constantly trying to steal electrons from our healthy cells.
So by neutralizing these free radicals before they can damage our DNA or arterial walls, these local superfoods act as a chemical shield against the aging process.
Precisely. So we have a highly efficient, nutrient-dense, calorically restricted fuel source.
But what about the engine? How do they exercise? Because the modern fitness industry tells us we need to do high-intensity interval training, heavy deadlifts, CrossFit, to live longer.
Right. But these supercentenarians are definitely not strapping on heart rate monitors or attending 5 a.m. boot camps.
No, they are not. The epidemiological data reveals a very clear pattern. The people who live the longest are not the ones performing the most intense bursts of exercise.
They are simply the people who stop moving the least.
Gentle, continuous movement.
Yes. The Okinawan lifestyle is built on continuous, low-grade physical movement. It's integrated into the fabric of their day rather than segmented into a punishing one-hour gym session.
They garden for hours, squatting and standing, which maintains hip mobility and joint lubrication. They walk to their neighbors' houses.
And they engage in radio taiso.
Right, the daily warm-up done by millions in Japan. It's a 5-minute routine of dynamic stretching and joint mobility broadcast over the radio.
It gently wakes up the nervous system and increases blood flow without triggering the massive cortisol spike associated with heavy weightlifting or marathon running.
It really mirrors Eastern disciplines like Tai Chi and Qigong. These practices don't aim to build huge muscles. They focus on the coordination of breath, posture, and intention.
They engage the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state, while keeping the physical machinery supple.
The text highlights specific Qigong practices too, like the 6 healing sounds.
Right, where practitioners visualize energy flowing through specific organs while exhaling precise frequencies to physically vibrate and calm the internal systems. It's the ultimate practice of mitigating physical stress.
Okay, so we've covered the mind, the work, the diet, and the movement. But there's a final pillar supporting this longevity that we cannot ignore, and it might be the most difficult one to replicate in the modern Western world.
The community.
Yes, the Okinawans rely on the moai.
The moai is a social construct that provides an impenetrable safety net of emotional and financial support.
These are tight-knit groups formed in childhood or through shared neighborhoods that literally remain together for life.
Historically, they formed out of pure necessity. If a farmer had a bad harvest, the moai would pool their resources to ensure his family didn't starve.
And today, it functions as a highly organized support system. Members contribute a set amount of money to the group every month.
They use these funds to host dinners, play games, and celebrate life events.
But the critical function is the emergency reserve. If a member faces a sudden medical bill, a job loss, or a crisis, the group provides an advance from the savings pool.
Think about the physiological impact of that. Most of our modern anxiety stems from the terror of financial ruin or facing tragedy entirely alone.
The moai eliminates that existential threat. Your baseline cortisol drops permanently because, with absolute certainty that your tribe will not let you fall.
They also engage in yuumaru, which translates to teamwork or mutual aid.
Right. In places like Ogimi, communal labor is just the default. If a roof needs repairing, the neighbors don't just send a sympathy card. They physically show up with tools to rebuild it together.
The constant physical presence of the community creates a web of interdependence. It keeps the elderly socially engaged, feeling needed, and deeply connected.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here. I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone listening to this deep dive in a sprawling American suburb or a dense, anonymous European city.
Sure, it's a very different environment.
Right. Our society is built on hyper-individualism. We change jobs every 3 years, we move across the country away from our families, and we barely know the names of the people living in the apartment next door.
That's the modern reality.
So, creating a financial and emotional moai from scratch in this environment feels practically impossible. If we can't replicate the moai, are we just doomed to an isolated, high-stress existence?
Well, the sociological barriers are very real. We can't just artificially impose a lifelong Japanese village structure onto a transient modern city. However, the underlying biological need for connection remains. We have to systematically reconstruct the principles of the moai using the tools available to us.
How do we do that?
Sociology distinguishes between strong ties, like close family and intimate friends, and weak ties, which are people like the barista, the mail carrier, the person you see at the dog park.
And modern isolation often stems from a lack of those weak ties. The casual, low-stakes interactions that make us feel tethered to a physical place.
Exactly. So we have to actively engineer those interactions. We have to substitute the village structure with deliberate local engagement.
Like joining a neighborhood association, volunteering at a community garden, or participating in local recreational sports.
Yes. The key is consistency and physical proximity. You cannot build a moai through social media or video calls.
Human nervous systems require synchronous physical presence, eye contact, shared laughter, physical collaboration to release the oxytocin that buffers against stress.
We have to prioritize building our village, however small, over the convenience of digital isolation.
Which makes sense. But even if we perfectly optimize our diet, master our flow state, and cultivate a deep community, we must address the final reality of human existence: chaos.
Tragedy, illness, and catastrophic setbacks are unavoidable.
And a philosophy of longevity that shatters at the first sign of profound suffering is useless. How do the longest living populations protect their Ikigai when the world just falls apart?
They employ a fiercely practical framework of resilience. The authors draw brilliant parallels between the Stoicism of ancient Greece, the teachings of Buddhism, and deeply ingrained Japanese aesthetics.
Both Stoicism and Buddhism aim to decouple our internal peace from external circumstances.
They don't demand asceticism. You are allowed to enjoy the pleasures of life. But they demand absolute clarity regarding the locus of control.
The Stoic philosopher Epictetus famously stated that it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters.
Exactly. We suffer because we try to assert control over variables that belong entirely to the universe: the economy, the weather, the opinions of others, or the onset of disease.
When we inevitably fail to control them, we experience despair. True resilience requires the brutal categorization of every problem. Can I control this or not?
If you can, you take action. If you cannot, you must practice radical acceptance.
And in Japanese culture, this acceptance of the uncontrollable is visually and philosophically represented by the concept of wabi-sabi.
It's the appreciation of the beauty found in the flawed, the incomplete, and the impermanent.
Western culture is obsessed with permanence and perfection. The architectural comparison in the text perfectly illustrates this.
Right, the cathedrals.
In Europe, we build massive stone cathedrals, engineered to defy time and stand unchanged for thousands of years. We want our legacy to be immortal.
But in Japan, they build structures like the Grand Shrine of Ease out of wood and then intentionally tear it down and completely rebuild it every 20 years.
Which is wild to think about. They don't worship the physical wood. They worship the tradition and the process.
Yeah.
They embrace the reality that all matter decays.
When you internalize wabi-sabi, you stop demanding that your health, your career, or your relationships remain perfectly preserved in amber. You find beauty in the aging process, in the wrinkles, in the shifting seasons of your life.
And closely tied to this is the concept of ichigo ichi, which translates roughly to, this moment exists only now and won't come again.
It forces a state of violent presence.
If you are drinking a cup of tea with a friend, that exact configuration of the universe, the specific slant of the afternoon light, the exact mood you are in, the precise age of your friend will never, ever be repeated.
It makes the present moment infinitely precious, pulling your mind away from regretting the past or dreading the future.
But the authors go beyond simply enduring chaos. They introduce a concept coined by risk analyst Nassim Nicholas Taleb called anti-fragility.
This is the ultimate evolutionary strategy.
The distinction here is massive. Resilience means when life punches you in the face, you take the hit, you absorb the shock, and you return to your original shape. You withstand the blow.
But if a system is anti-fragile, the blow actually improves it. The chaos makes it stronger, like the mythical Hydra cut off one head and two grow back.
So how do we apply that to a human life?
Yeah.
How do we ensure that a sudden job loss or a personal tragedy doesn't destroy our Ikigai, but rather expands it?
Think about a forest. If humans suppress every single small fire in a forest, the dry underbrush accumulates for decades.
The forest becomes highly fragile.
Exactly. When a spark finally catches, it creates a catastrophic inferno that destroys everything. But a healthy forest is anti-fragile. It relies on frequent small fires to clear out the dead wood.
Some species of pine trees, like the lodgepole pine, have cones that are sealed with resin. They literally cannot release their seeds to reproduce unless they are exposed to the extreme heat of a forest fire.
The destruction is the exact mechanism required for new growth. To make our lives anti-fragile like that forest, we have to deliberately introduce small stressors and diversify our identities.
We must create redundancies.
Yes. In Ogimi, almost every centenarian interviewed had multiple avenues of purpose. They had their primary occupation, but they also had secondary pursuits.
Like a vegetable garden they sold produce from, a deep dedication to a specific craft, or vital roles within their moai.
If a person defines their entire existence by a single corporate job title and the company downsizes, their identity is annihilated. They are fragile.
But if your Ikigai is spread across your community work, your creative hobbies, and your relationships, the loss of a job is just a small fire.
It clears the underbrush, freeing up time and energy to dedicate to those other pursuits, allowing new seeds to germinate. You grow stronger because the chaos forced you to adapt.
You eliminate the vulnerabilities, massive financial debt, toxic dependencies, rigid expectations, so that when the universe introduces randomness, you can leverage that kinetic energy to propel yourself into a new phase of growth.
When we synthesize all of these complex layers, the biological mechanisms of aging, the psychological healing of Morita therapy, the neurological optimization of flow,
The cellular protection of the Okinawan diet, and the philosophical armor of anti-fragility, we arrive at the practical conclusions of the research.
the authors brilliantly distill this vast landscape of wisdom into what they call the 10 rules of Ikigai.
Let's rapidly but calmly recap these 10 rules outlined in the epilogue. With the context we've built, they carry so much more weight than simple platitudes.
Absolutely.
Rule 1. Stay active, don't retire. Keep the neural pathways firing by continually bringing value to your community.
Rule 2, take it slow. Sever the connection between panic and productivity.
Rule 3. Don't fill your stomach. Practice harahachibu to trigger cellular cleanup and reduce metabolic stress.
Rule 4. Surround yourself with good friends. Build your moai to keep your oxytocin high and your cortisol low.
Rule 5. Get in shape for your next birthday. Engage in daily, low-grade movement to lubricate the joints without spiking inflammation.
Rule 6. Smile. Acknowledge the profound privilege of simply being alive.
Rule 7. Reconnect with nature. Ground your nervous system in the physical world.
Rule 8. Give thanks to your ancestors, your community, and the systems that sustain you.
Rule 9. Live in the moment. Practice Ichigo-ichi.
And Rule 10. Follow your Ikigai.
It is a remarkable blueprint because it avoids rigid metrics. There is no mathematical formula for finding your Ikigai.
Right. No personality test or spreadsheet can calculate it for you. It relies entirely on your willingness to listen to your own intuition and curiosity.
Pay attention to the specific tasks that silence your inner critic and induce flow. Happiness, according to this philosophy, is exclusively found in the doing.
It lives in the execution of the daily rituals, not in the attainment of the final goal.
Exactly. And I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over today. We spend an enormous amount of energy in our modern lives searching for our passion.
We treat it like a glowing treasure chest buried under a giant red X on a map.
We tell ourselves, if I can just find this magical passion, my life will suddenly make sense and the work will be easy. But what if your Ikigai isn't an object you find out in the world?
What if it's a choice?
What if it is simply a specific, highly mindful approach you choose to apply to the things you're already doing? Consider your routine tomorrow. If you woke up and treated your most mundane responsibility, brewing the coffee, writing a routine report, or sweeping the floor with the reverence of a master artisan,
Finding that microflow.
if you brought the full weight of your attention to the micro movements of your day, embracing the process and letting go of the outcome, how would your experience of reality shift?
The meaning is never out there waiting for us. It is generated internally by the quality of our attention.
If you approach your life with the quiet, joyful certainty that how you do things is your true purpose, the path ahead might still be difficult, the challenges will still arise, but the journey will be entirely undeniably yours.
Beautifully said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the art of living. We wish you a long, profoundly engaged, and deeply purposeful journey. Until next time.